Right. Well, apologies if you're offended by what you're listening to.
I just think this is astonishing. This is what has happened to our country.
This is the cycle of human suffering.
Much of what we heard from President Trump throughout this census shutdown has been full of misinformation.
Meth, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl.
And even malice.
Vicious coyotes.
This is the What and the Why podcast for the week ending the 11th of January, 2019.
Hello, it's the What. It tries to be the Why. It's the What and the Why podcast with the intellectual giant of the Manchester to Liverpool ship canal, fresh from bathing his whippet in a bath full of coal, otherwise known as...
Oh, I'm hoping that's not me. David Waywell.
David Waywell. And some bloke from Leeds living in self-imposed exile in West London, probably drinking white wine and watching foreign films containing subtitles and angst, amongst other suspiciously southern-type behaviour, Tim Marshall. This week, self-righteous, shouty, sweary types dominate Westminster, and we're not talking about the MPs there. Donald Trump does his bit for the shutdown by shutting down the conversation. Lady Gaga's herself. There's a storm over a weatherman, a brief news roundup, and there might well be a fact. David, how was your week?
It was rubbish, but all right, let's move quickly on.
Bloody Eeyore.
Oh, I just had a bad week.
I know, real life stuff, I know.
Yeah. My mum went in to have a new knee and the operation was cancelled, so it's been one of those sort of weeks.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, on the plus side, she'll...
But I was going to say, at least I'm not hungover today.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say she'll be heartened by the Leeds United victory. Yeah, if my voice is a bit croaky, I have just returned from northern climes. I went to see the Leeds game last night.
Have you been hanging out in some bushes watching the Derby team train, though? That's not why you've not caught a cold, have you?
For non-football listeners, the Leeds United management were caught spying at Derby County's training ground. Now, this did lead last night. Several blokes showed up, seriously, with binoculars at the game.
Brilliant.
Yeah, to spy on the... away fans.
I don't think it's such a bad thing, though. It surprises me that teams don't do it.
We can briefly talk about the ethics of it, but hang on. The chants were, sing when we're spying, we only sing when we're spying. All spies aren't we, instead of all Leeds aren't we, and we're Leeds United, we spy where we want. So it was all jolly good, clean fun. I then went, the game didn't finish till nearly 10, so I wasn't back in the city centre pub till just after, and then it was it's the anniversary of David Bowie's death, and I ended up in this underground bar singing along to, We Can Be Heroes until late in the morning.
That's why your throat's gone.
Yeah, couldn't. Well, it was more the football. Couldn't really sleep, so didn't wake up at 6 o'clock and drove back home. So that was my week. On the ethics of spying on another team's training. I don't really have a problem with it. Firstly, because everybody does it, and second,
you don't have a problem with it because Leeds were caught doing it. That's the crux of the.
That is also the reason why. But I do think there's an awful lot of it goes on, and look, 11 blokes still played 11 blokes on the football pitch.
Yeah, I'd be disappointed if Liverpool weren't watching like what Man City were doing ahead of the game. So.
And I mean, there is some talk of FA getting involved, points being docked. I don't think it'll come to that, because if they do that, there'll be lots and lots of occasions where people are then caught doing it, and it'll just be non-stop.
I suspect more of this is to do with Lampard making an excuse for not winning, because it's an easy excuse to make.
Anyway, we only sing when we're spying, and I may have to go and buy a pair of toy binoculars to take to Stoke City away next week. Right, we've got some stuff, and includes an email about Brexit, but not the boring side of it, that awful side of it. Again, people who, we do have a fair few listeners who are not from the United Kingdom. MPs have been roundly abused outside of Parliament on their way in and out of Parliament and chants have been directed at them as they're doing interviews outside Parliament, all to do with Brexit, called traitors, much worse, including Nazis. One female MP, Anna Soubry, was surrounded and harangued over a sustained period of, must have been 2 minutes, as she tried to walk down the pavement, called all sorts of names. There has now been an arrest. We have to tread carefully because of that, but we can talk around it. But in the meantime, we got an email from Rob, regular listener. Hi, Rob. Tim and David, in case you're covering the Anna Soubry Nazi story, he thinks the way the story is currently being covered is counterproductive, reinforcing this idea of a Westminster elite getting preferential treatment. He goes on, I'm a big believer in letting extremists be extreme. The public at large don't like it. It is one of those cases where, regardless of the treatment of Soubry being unpleasant, it is a better way to leave it alone than get the police in. Why wasn't this type of behaviour, if it is criminal, applied to Soubry but not to the likes of Nigel Farage, former UKIP leader? Thirdly, what message does it send to communities besieged by crime, which I once belonged to many years ago, who struggle to get the police to attend even a real crime? And then finally, he knows someone that's involved with the far right, and he's concerned that if there are arrests and prosecutions, that'll actually feed into this sense of victimhood. Oh, well, how come Muslims did X, Y, and Z and the police didn't do anything? Or there was an abuse scandal here and nobody did anything. And he ends, the saying is, don't feed the troll. It should be equally applied to the far right. Best wishes, Rob. David.
Well, I agree with him. I mean, I think there's a few nuanced points you can make around that and around the whole situation. I mean, for example, just to be clear, they didn't just attack Soubry, they also attacked Owen Jones, which I would suggest that's even worse, because politicians are there to have a debate with the public and to sort of put up with a little bit of this. I'm not sure attacking journalists and intimidating journalists is the way you want to go. I agree with Rob completely about freedom of speech. I've always argued that there should be a real caution when it comes to limiting what people can say. However, if you change the word Nazi to paedophile, then I think people would actually rightly argue that you shouldn't be allowed to say you're a paedophile. I mean, there are limits to what, simply because, I mean, there's a point at which you start to instigate, you know, you're inviting people to attack people and to, you know.
Okay, we're all on the same page so far, you, me and Rob. I'm pretty confident that not talking about any particular arrest, because it could be problematic legally, but in general, I would be surprised if action is taken about the word Nazi. If action was to be taken, I think it would be because of the concept of harassment and intimidation. And for me, I have seen scenes. I was down there on Thursday, actually. I was filming with German television, doing something about one of my books, and one bloke just turned around at me, and his opening remark to me was, "Hey, you, are you fake news?" As opposed to saying good morning, which, you know, would have been a better opening gambit, I'd have thought. I think there has been some intimidatory behaviour, and I think that's a police matter.
Yeah, and I think it's the way that they chased her down the street and chased Owen Jones down the street. I agree. I thought at the time, in fact, before the story, I think I tweeted, I couldn't believe that this wasn't a bigger story, and then it kind of suddenly erupted. Okay, well,
here's a more difficult one then. I remember more than a year ago, it's probably during the referendum campaign, Nigel Farage from the right of centre politics, he was leader of UKIP, he had to come out of a building in front of a baying mob who surrounded his car. I think his family may have been there at the same time, shouted that sort of abuse at him, and I would have been intimidated had it been me. So how come? Because I remember the news story, and it was like mentioned in passing. Why has it become such a big story in the UK and that didn't?
I would actually argue that I think these things do actually happen. It does actually happen that that the left are attacked as much as the right for this kind of protests. I mean, and I never know how to say. What was it? Antifa.
Just think anti-fascist, Antifa.
Yeah, Antifa, that's it. Antifa, I mean, we've criticised Antifa in the past. I mean, it is the same kind of behaviour. I just think there's a certain amount of revisionism going on, and whataboutism.
Okay, I'm trying to rip through the points. Sorry to cut you off. Beg your pardon. What about Rob's idea? What message does it send to communities besieged by crime, which I once belonged to many years ago, who struggle to get the police to attend? Now, that is true. There's an awful, these days, many people, especially in high crime areas, all you get is a phone call and a crime number to put on your insurance claim. So what about people living there that think, hang on a minute, why aren't they taking action about my issues?
Well, I think it's two separate issues. He has got a fair point, but what I would argue is if you allow these scenes to get broadcast of small, I mean, let's understand this. These are literally only maybe 10 or 20 individuals who are extremely impassioned about Brexit, surrounding the cameras and making it seem like there's a bigger protest going on. And if you allow that to happen, to be broadcast and to be repeated, it will grow, it will encourage it. I mean, I agree there's two stories here, there's two issues here, but I do think the police do have to sort of show that there's got to be a zero tolerance for this kind of outrage, because again, it is a small number of people, and they're trying to, in their own way, I mean, other people are trying to subvert democracy, and the whole issue of democracy is extremely difficult at the moment. But I was going to say, you just can't allow 10 people to sort of imply that there's a huge revolution about to start.
But there is something afoot and abroad. Speaking of abroad, the German AfD MP. And I was talking to these guys from German television about the AfD this week because I was saying, what terminology are they? You can't call them Nazis. Are they extreme right? Are they radical right? Are they far right? And this guy said, well, it is difficult because there's a spectrum of views and there's some reasonable people and there's some unreasonable people in it. He said, I think if you just stick with far right. But what reminded me of that was that there was an AfD MP was beaten unconscious by 3 masked people in a deliberate attack in the city of Bremen. So we're not alone with this. Last point from Rob. Where are we? Yeah, he knows someone involved with the far right, and he knows that sort of mindset. It will be that if the abusers that we've been talking about are arrested and charged, there'll be a sense of feeding victimhood.
Yeah, absolutely. But, well, I mean, isn't this the argument I think I've made quite a few times, that if you don't have a serious discussion about these issues, including the more extreme points of view, then you don't have a proper. You will have people feeling that the voices are being suppressed. And also, one last point I mentioned last week, I was reading the book about the coddling of the American mind. This is one of the issues they make. If you don't expose yourself to bad ideas at an early age, you become oversensitive to bad ideas, and then you never progress. You never learn how to defeat bad ideas. It's exactly the same as kids with peanut butter. If you don't introduce kids to peanut butter at a young age, they develop allergies to peanut butter. It's pretty much the same thing with these far right ideas, I think.
Right, I'm going to move on. Are you ready for this?
The marquee when it's shut down, eh? Trust me, daddy.
When it's shut down, that's not me and it's shut down. Ring pussy, it's shut down. Hey. Fashion week and it's shut down.
Well, there's Skepta. So what story are we moving to?
I'm assuming this is going to be about Lady Gaga. Is it? I'm guessing.
Can you think of a single word that you understood from that rap song I just played?
No.
I'm going to play it again.
I feel like I wanted to say like Alan Partridge. That's just noise to me.
Right. Let me try that again. Are you ready?
Hey, daddy.
Hey, man's never been in. When it's shut down, that's not me and it's shut down. Ring pussy, it's shut down. Hey. Fashion week and it's shut down.
Right, David, there's one particular word that is repeated over and over again. What is it?
I heard shut down and pussy and...
Right, I refer you now to the news story we're going to talk about. This week, the shutdown in the United States continued and actually went into a record number of... Are you with me?
Yeah, I just think you played a terrible trick there because you knew I thought it was going to be the Lady Gaga. Yeah.
So, we're into the shutdown, and hundreds of thousands of people are not getting paychecks, and it's still complete standoff. And yet, the United States has not ground to a halt. And I think this speaks to the Founding Fathers and how they set the country up.
In what way?
Well, it's a federal government. Each of the individual states are getting on with their business. At the national level, people are now going to work without getting paid, but they will eventually get their paychecks. But if government systems in smaller states like the UK or Poland or somewhere had a similar shutdown, I think there would be far more of a paralysis of the country. But America, as I said, the system that the Founding Fathers set up, in many other democracies, the government is sort of the system. In the United States, it's just very, very different. They do go in for much more small government. I don't think you agree with me.
I'm just thinking. No, I've been watching quite a bit of the coverage, as you know I would, and I know there's a lot of families who are suffering. So I do think it's having a larger effect than we probably sense over here. And I think some of the government institutions might not yet be kind of feeling it. I mean, some of the
no, I agree with all those points. I was just making the point that it really does go back to the Constitution of the United States and the fact that it's each individual state that make up the country can actually get on with things in a way that smaller countries like most of them in Europe just wouldn't be able to. Anyway, what's the way out?
Well, as I said last week, that I thought Trump didn't realise what a bad position he's in. I think it's been. I think he's becoming to realise what a bad situation he's in, and I think the only way out now for Trump is to possibly take it to the national emergency situation and allow the courts to decide, and then at least he can turn to his base and say, well, I tried. I think that's the only... I think it's a terribly weak position he's in, and I don't think it's going to enamour him to many people, but the Democrats have got absolutely no reason to give in. And I just think
and my understanding of it is that if it goes to a national emergency, at that point he can appropriate funds from the military and get on, and try to get on and build his wall and fence. But obviously there would be a legal challenge to that, which would drag on. But in the meantime, the government employees would be paid and things would go back to normal.
I don't know. I think it's much bleaker than that. This is headed into a constitutional crisis if Trump claws a national emergency, because it means he can start to take money from other areas of government. I saw a joke on Twitter the other day where somebody said we're going to build a wall, but Puerto Rico is going to pay for it. But there's also talk of him taking money from California, where it's been used to protect the forests from drought and rebuild after the recent fires. I'm not saying Trump's going to go full-scale authoritarian, but calling a national emergency allows a president to access staggering powers. I mean, I think he can even block certain media and even put troops on the streets. But in the obviously it's going to allow him to also bypass Congress and start to fund his own projects without actually any kind of oversight.
No, well, that takes me back to the Founding Fathers. They have checks and balances on presidential power.
They do, but this is a weak area, though. This has never been tested. And what we're finding with the Constitution under Trump is there are lots of gaps in the Constitution which ideally need to be patched. But there are these people who, the textual originalists, people who believe that the Founding Fathers created a document which can't be amended. And then there's Jefferson's idea, which it's going to be an organic...
There's been dozens of amendments.
Of course, that's why amendments are called amendments. But there are people in America, especially on the right and the Christians, who sort of treat it like a holy text and the Bible, and you can't change a word because this is...
Oh, very briefly, going back to Brexit, doing the rounds, and it's surfaced now, is that several people are saying that if there isn't a pop group or a band in a few years' time called the Dominic Grieve Amendment, then there's no sense of irony left in Britain. Yeah. It reminds me, I guess that's a reference to the... I think it's the Alan Parsons Project reference, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think we should start that. I think that's a great title.
The Dominic Grieve Amendment. Right, as you know, Nancy Pelosi was invited to the White House to talk about the shutdown. Donald Trump met her. The What and the Why podcast has got an exclusive recording of the meeting between Nancy Pelosi and Donald, and here's a little clip of it.
How's about some water and breadsticks?
Yes, please.
Breadsticks for table 29!
Donald! Temper!
I'll be right back to take your order.
So, David, what happened next?
Well, he'd walked into the room, he'd handed sweets out, and then he asked Pelosi, can I have my money? She said no, and he slammed the table and walked out, didn't he? Basically.
Yes, that's a version of events, but he says that's fake news. He agrees he walked out. It was a very short meeting. The difference is whether he banged the table or not. He says he didn't. Nancy Pelosi said he did. He says he walked in. He said, now look, are you going to give me this money for this fence, the wall, or not? She says, well, no, we're not. And he said, right, in that case, we've got nothing to talk about. And he walked out. This is also, I mean, every single time the man comes on television, there is something that we haven't seen before in US presidential politics.
Psychology.
Yeah.
This is a man's ego is getting above, it's getting... You're just not going to get past Trump's psychology, and if he's not going to back down, then I don't think the Democrats will, and I think it'll come down to the Republicans having to bring the president into order, because I think the Republicans do want the government reopening. Democrats certainly will, and I just think they've just got to somehow placate Trump. I don't know how they do it.
Well, through the Mueller inquiry, if that ever finishes. I've just pulled up his tweet. He said, just left a meeting with Chuck and Nancy. A total waste of time. I asked what is going to happen in 30 days if I quickly open things up. Are you going to approve border security, which includes a wall or steel barrier? Nancy said, no! I said, bye-bye. Nothing else works. And that's it.
Yeah. This is. We get into the point where you can't even talk about the politics of this. I do think we're down to the psychology of a man, and we need experts to make that, judgment.
And of course, they're not allowed to. They're not supposed to ethically comment.
No, they're not.
But someone they haven't examined.
I always think it's very strange that if you bought a car, the brakes would have been tested to destruction. If I went to work in the White House to serve tea and coffee to the president, I would have to have psychological profiling to make sure I'm not unstable. Yet a man can become president with, well, questionable. I mean, some people talk about dementia, and I don't know. It just seems that we've entered into a realm where there's no sense anymore. This fence is becoming a fixation for him, and I really don't see.
Well, okay, No, I don't disagree. It's a fixation. But I do question, as we're both clearly now PhDs in psychology, the idea that he might be unstable. Because I think this is all deliberate, worked out. He knows full well that there is this percentage of people that actually either don't care that he behaves that way or even likes it. And again, he was elected by the Electoral College, majority, not by the majority of the US voting public, to build a wall. He's trying to build a wall. People are stopping him building a wall. You can make the argument people are stopping him fulfilling the will of the people that voted.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Unfilter argument. There is an argument that...
Well, just because it's made by someone who is right of centre, it does not mean that the argument is incorrect.
No, it's not. But I think, and then Trump's reaction to Unfilter's threats makes sense. You know, she said that if he doesn't build this wall, his presidency is going to be seen as a joke. And I think there is a good argument to say, well, he's responded to that. But I think there's
and it's not necessarily seen as a joke if he says, look at all these things I did and these successes I had in his terms and in the terms of his support. And the only reason we didn't get the biggest one done is because these people stood in the way of the will of the people.
Yeah, but I think what the point where the psychology comes into it is, I can't see any kind of political calculation in what he's doing, and it seems like we've tripped over from like a man who is dealing in politics where he's got a path forward to a man who is responding almost instinctively to the fact that a woman, Nancy Pelosi in this instance, has said to him, you can't have something. And that is enraging him in a way which doesn't make any sense.
No, well, again, we don't always completely disagree. I completely disagree with it's anything to do with her being a woman. Yes, I know his track record on women, but Chuck
Schumer.
Chuck was there as well.
Yeah, but all I'm raising is there's been an argument in the last week about the fact that he seems to have a different relationship to Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is one of the few people he's not actually got a derogatory nickname for.
Yeah, well, that one's going to run all year. All right, staying in the United States, also with characters, shall we say, couple of stories which caught your attention, I know, David. Firstly, the Surviving R. Kelly documentary. This is a singer I'm afraid I hadn't actually heard of, R. Kelly. Huge R&B over the past decade. Has now been accused of multiple cases of sexual misconduct and more serious allegations that he held women in a sex cult. Your attention was caught because Lady Gaga, who had done a cooperation with him on a song, has withdrawn it from streaming.
It is an interesting story because of the fact, well, one, it's apparently, I think, R. Kelly lives in Trump Tower, which is a little interesting fact.
Yes, he lives in Trump Tower in Chicago.
It's an interesting story because of the fact we were talking a few weeks ago about revisionism and how you treat your history, and it's interesting the idea that Lady Gaga, I don't know much about her, but she seems to want to erase this part of her own history and rewrite it in this statement that she issued, saying, it was a part of her life and she was, regretted it and so forth. And I find it amazing that how we want to, the constant need to revise people from the past. I mean, the great example I was talking about was John Donne, who was like a right Lothario in his youth, and then
the poet John Donne. No Man is an Island.
Yeah, and then later in life he became, I think, Dean of St Paul's.
Not the centre half for Colchester United. No.
Don't know.
But go on.
Yeah. But I mean, it's like what would happen if Shakespeare was discovered to have committed a rape when he was 17? Would we completely erase his canon from our tradition? It's again, it's the same story, but told in a different way. That.
I just on this, I don't think you're comparing like with like. She collaborated on a song with him, which has questionable lyrics in it. It comes to light that this guy actually is allegedly beyond questionable. He's just off the scale if what is said about him is true. And that one song, which was her and him collaborating, she no longer wants to stream it. It would profit him as well as her.
Yeah, I suppose that's a fair point, yeah.
The dollars, and so she removes it. I know your wider point, and I understand it, and it's a great question about Shakespeare and anybody else that you admire.
Yeah, no, you've changed my mind there. I can see. I think
that was easy.
Well, I think if somebody makes a point where I think this is what you want to try to encourage in the world, is people to change their mind. There was a great little thing actually. Jordan Peterson recently was challenged by is it an Australian comedian, Jim Jeffries? Yeah, and he made a point. Jim Jeffries came back and Jordan Peterson said, "Yes, actually, I think I'm wrong and I've changed my mind." And I think changing mind when you're given a good argument is actually one of the things which you should encourage.
Well, God bless you and thank you, and I don't think that's ever happened to me before, so thank you very much. The other one, which is on a similar, it's different, but it's in the same ballpark. A TV meteorologist, a weatherman, as we say, from Rochester, New York, was reading the weather and mentioned Martin Luther King Park. There was another word beginning with C in his next line, and he unfortunately, instead of saying king, used a racial, a word that is a racial slur.
A TV weatherman is fighting back after he was fired for something he said on live TV. He says he didn't say it, but to many of those watching, it sure sounded like he uttered an ugly racial slur.
Jeremy Capel says he got tongue-tied during a broadcast and uttered what sounded like an offensive racial slur.
Martin Luther King Jr. Park.
Viewers in Rochester, New York were stunned.
Now, he's been fired. There's no reason whatsoever in his past history that he is a racist. It seems entirely 100% that he just flubbed, as the Americans say. In comes social media. This guy needs to be fired. Call the station. This has got to be addressed. What he said was racist and willful, point blank. And they fired him. This is madness.
It is madness, because I don't think people realise, unless you're actually in a job where you've done it for a living, so you'll understand it more than I do. But I
once said the C word on air, which I'll come to in a moment.
Well, yeah,
Go on.
I was going to actually mention that, because what I've discovered is, doing these podcasts, because I've been writing for many years and I very rarely read out what I write. But speaking is an extremely difficult task, because as soon as you start speaking, you become aware that you're speaking, and as soon as you become aware that you're speaking, your mind just dissolves into, your nicely structured arguments just become an absolute mess. But what I find interesting about this story is how language is a strange form of language, because one of the bands I listen to, the Sleaford Mods, have used wonderful kind of strange northern phrases and sayings, and it occurred to me the other day that every day I must say the C word a dozen times, the actual C word, which I would never use in my life. But in the northern dialect, you'll say, I couldn't make it up. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing to say to my mother. Yet when you actually pull it apart, phonetically,
yes,
it's astonishing. So I agree with you. These what you call flubs must happen all the time. And this is just...
I'll tell you about mine. It was a particularly confluence of events. What was her name? Miss Whiplash. Many years ago, Miss Whiplash allegedly had this little black book of loads of MPs' names that she had caned in her sex den. Great tabloid story. And, wow, well, if this is true, many of them have been compromised and blah, blah, blah. So the police were actually looking for her. And she went off to France to get away from all this for a few days. And the police didn't know that at the time. They kept looking for her. And the line on the auto cue when I was reading the news in those days said, police say so far the hunt has cost them £100,000. So of course I said, police say so far the has cost them £100,000. And I was pulled off air for 3 months and told to...
Was it live?
Be more careful. Yeah, it was live. To be more careful. I thought it was a bit harsh, but on the other hand, I didn't half concentrate.
Was this the days before social media or YouTube?
Yeah, it's 20 years ago.
Thank God. Because it's happened on Radio 4 a few times with Jeremy Hunt, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I just think we need to, you need to be relaxed about it for exactly the point you make. Some of the words actually can sound, if you say them in a certain accent, or your brain just clicks. Mistakes happen. They could have said, surely, look, this guy made a mistake. He apologises for making the mistake, but in no way was this racist. But actually sacking him.
It is, and I think a few key figures. Al Roker has come out.
That's right, and it's relevant to mention his ethnicity. Al Roker is black. Well known in the States, and he came out and said, and he's from the same network, and said this is nuts, firing him for this. Yeah, I'll end this story with a true story, but I'm not going to give all the details because not everybody involved is passed on. But great guy I knew who has actually passed on, but he said live on air. I'm just not going to use it, but he said live on air, something. And then he said, by accident, he said the C word. You could see him blink. And then he said, and for those of you who thought I said C word, I didn't. Which is comedy gold. But he actually said this in a news broadcast. Bless him. Right.
That's the way you've got to do it. You've got to take it head on. You don't let it slip by and pretend it didn't happen.
Moving on. Quick news roundup, because I am trying to hang on to some vestiges of some genuine geopolitics in this podcast. So, during the 10 weeks of the Gilets jaunes yellow vest protests, 2/3 of all the roadside speed cameras in France were vandalised. There's 2,600 ground-level cameras, and a majority of them have been burnt, painted over, blown up, or smashed. Every single camera on the Toulouse ring road has been damaged. France faces a loss of €1 billion in revenue in speeding fines until they're fixed. If they could delay that until the late summer, at which point I'm driving to Italy, I'd be grateful. France and Germany are to sign a treaty this month promising to pool their defence, economic and foreign policies. There will even be shared Euro districts with merged public transport and electricity networks. And my reading of this is that it's an attempt to absolutely cement the core of the EU at a time when it's clearly struggling to remain united and indeed relevant on the world stage, which is linked to the next one. The Trump administration has downgraded the diplomatic status of the EU without even bothering to tell Brussels. The Obama government had upgraded the EU to the status of a nation-state, but the EU ambassador discovered this was no longer the case when he was shunted off the list of nation-state ambassadors that had been invited to the funeral of President Bush. Finally, the Amazon boss, Jeff Bezos, announced he was getting a divorce, and within nanoseconds, this gave birth to a new joke, that actually his wife was leaving him on a neighbour's doorstep. This week's worst spam. This is one for you, David. Our website gets these. Every website in the world gets these. I don't fully understand them. This is a comment to the contact Tim Marshall .thewhatandthewhy.com webmaster. They clearly don't know me if they're going to call me a webmaster. Your website is missing out on at least 300 visitors per day. Our traffic system will dramatically increase your traffic, blah, blah, blah. We offer 500 free targeted visitors during our free trial. We offer up to 30,000 targeted visitors per month. Hope this helps. And then there's a website to click on, which I'm not going to. And then there's an unsubscribe button to click on, which I'm not going to, because I fear what is behind both of those clicks.
Wisely.
But it's probably not malware, although I'm not going to take that chance. But how would they? How do they know we are missing out on 300 visitors a day?
Because you're not paying them to give you 300 visitors a day. It's a scam. It's a scam founded on the belief that all websites, or most popular websites, have a lot of visitors. And in a way, there's a kind of logic to that, because if you get a lot of traffic on your website and Google recognises you're getting a lot of traffic on your website, Google will promote your website and give you more visibility on the Google searches.
Sounds great. Sign me up.
Sounds great. However, Google also can recognise the quality of your visitors, and they can detect the difference between a reader or a listener of this podcast.
David, I can assure you the quality of our visitors is extraordinarily high.
No, because a lot of the visitors are just bots.
No, they're not.
Well, they are.
Don't you go insulting our readers in that manner.
Well, they're not readers. They're just bots who hit your website, load it, and then move on to the next website. They're automated little programs on computers, and if you have enough of them, it can generate what looks like traffic.
Yeah, but sorry, there's two things going on here, David. One, our readers are not bots because they are genuine readers, because I haven't paid these people.
No, but
you're saying if you were to contact this, and there's so many of them out there, these outfits offering these free targeted visitors, at that point, that company somehow generates the bots to visit your site to get your...
Yes, they can do, but also all websites are already visited by bots. There are a lot of bots out there, and the way they operate is they visit your website, and without going into the technicalities of it, people can then see, oh, they've just visited, and here's a link back to their website.
Hang on, are you telling me that bloke called Roy Bott that keeps writing to me isn't real?
Yeah. No, it's just another side of the whole. People talk about the use of bots, the Russian bots, to promote messages on Facebook and Twitter. There's another side to it, which is they generate traffic on websites. It's another way they can. For example, if I opened up a website which was promoting a lot of Russian propaganda, I could direct bots to visit that website. Google would think, if Google wasn't as bright as they are, that website was really popular, and then whenever you type in a question about the subject which was on our website, we would come out first, and then that would help spread the Russian propaganda. That's how it works.
Thank you. This is our public service broadcasting slot. Now, David, it's time...
Oh, I was going to say there's some expert who'll come along and tell me I'm completely wrong, but that's...
No, you are the expert. You've got a PhD in this, haven't you?
No, I've got a PhD in English, but I've got a degree in computers, so...
No, well, that's good enough for me. That's good enough for me. I've always been a big fan of the 3 degrees. Right. Are you holding on to your seat?
I am, actually.
It's that time. Yes, it's that time for this week's fact. You know that clip I played at not the song, but the clip of the dinner date, the exclusive sound recording we had of the...
Donald Duck.
So, can you guess what this week's fact is actually about?
Donald Duck?
Oh, it's funny you should say that. Yeah, there's some facts about Donald Duck. Now, before you stop listening, this might be more interesting than you might think. Fact. Donald Duck was created by Walt Disney when he heard Clarence Nash doing his duck voice while reciting Mary Had a Little Lamb. Disney wanted a character that was more negative than Mickey Mouse, so the bad-tempered duck was born. Nash voiced the character from 1934 to 1983. Now, as for a more negative character than Mickey Mouse, I'm not sure that's possible. I mean, I can't stand Mickey Mouse. You?
I agree.
Yeah. Oh, hello, Pluto! Shut it, Mickey, is the only response to that. His middle name, Donald's, is Fauntleroy, and he's reportedly the only major Disney character with an official middle name. Do you know what his twin sister's called?
Minnie?
Dumbbell. No, that's bloody Donald's
Sorry.
girlfriend, I think. Dumbbella. And then his girlfriend, Daisy Duck. She was the one asking Donald to be nice earlier. And then there was 3 really irritating nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Ray Davies of the Kinks name-checks Donald Duck in the opening lines of his 1968 song, We Are the Village Green Preservation Society, with the lyrics, We are the Village Green Preservation Society, God Save Donald Duck, Vaudeville and Variety. A special microphone, the Newman TLM-170, was used to record Donald's voice. Preferred for its warmth, this microphone also rounds out the high tones and smooths the splat in Donald's voice. What microphone are you using, David?
Blue Yeti.
Oh, I'm using a Blue Raspberry, which I only bought because it's got a leather facing and it sort of like makes me think I'm,
in a Ferrari or something,
yeah. Talking about Donald, he won an Oscar for the 1943 animated short Der Führer's Face, which was originally titled Donald Duck in Nutziland. And, this is a really interesting one, isn't it? It's an anti-Nazi cartoon, obviously at the height of the Second World War, and it features Groucho Marx singing in it, which is absolutely something I had no idea about Donald Duck, that he was co-opted into the war movement. But here's just a little bit of a flavour of that.
Then the Führer says, we never will be slaves. We Heil, but still we work like slaves, while the Führer brags and lies and rants and raves. We Heil, and work into our graves.
That's quite something, don't you think, David?
From what I could hear, yeah. I mean, I'm a big Groucho fan, but I never knew he did anything with Disney.
No, and Donald Duck, or that he, got involved in the anti-war propaganda. It's absolutely fantastic.
So it was actually anti-war, was it?
Yeah. It's completely. It's all set in this Nazi land. It was Der Führer's face. And Donald Duck is sort of mistreated. He is in the Nazi Party himself, or at least he's wearing a Nazi uniform in it, but he's very much mistreated. And at the end line is... Sorry, let me translate that. The end line is, thank God I live in the democracy that is the United States of America. Yeah. 2 more. Finnish voters who want to register a protest vote mark their ballots with the name Donald Duck. Walt Disney said of the character, "One of the greatest satisfactions in our work here at the studio is the warm relationship that exists between our cartoon family." Actually, that's a rubbish one. I don't care about that. Let's end on the... It's far more interesting that Finnish voters mark their protest vote by saying Donald Duck. Now, I put it to you, David, that those facts about Donald Duck were more interesting than you thought they might be, yeah?
Well, given the fact I'm extremely indifferent to Disney, yeah, they are a little bit better than I expected. Especially because you can mention Groucho, so you win me over with that.
Yeah, it's also, by the way, as we're talking about cartoons, it's the 90th anniversary of the first Tintin cartoon book.
Is it?
Yeah, well, I'm not a fan of Tintin at all. I think it's deeply irritating, and that Asterix the Gaul should, basically bayonet him. Not that I like violence, of course. It started out as a very racist character, apparently. Hergé.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Hergé, the first one was set in the Congo and was, just full of...
Oh, of course it was, yeah.
Racist tropes.
Yeah, it is.
But he was then... He toned things down. People explained to him, look, you're not doing, the right thing. Most interesting thing about the Tintin thing I found out this week was the guy who drew it. What was his name? Do you know his name? Well, no, Hergé is what he's known as. Hergé's Adventures of Tintin. But that's because the French. There's a thing in France where sometimes you renverse, you reverse words, and no one can tell what you're talking about. It's why the word flic comes from, for cops. It's slang. And his name, his initials, so Georges Rémy, okay? Reverse it, Rémy Georges, R-J, R and J,
Yeah.
Reverse that and you get R in French and J, Hergé, and that's why he was called Hergé. Another fact, a free one there.
That is fascinating. I like Hergé. I like Asterix as well.
Huge fan of Asterix. And who knows, it is quite possible that one day in the future people might spoil their ballot papers by marking them Donald Trump. You can't rule it out. David, thank you for your patience with me.
Yeah, you've not done too bad given you hungover and I'm sort of suffering from Saturday shopping tiredness. So
I will leave you with, Donald Trump thinks that, said that Mexico was going to pay for the border wall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, the What and the Wise also tracked down some exclusive audio of the president's last visit to Mexico, and I'll leave you with that. Bye, David.
Bye.
The end is in sight.
The colourful phrase used by a charismatic figure.
This is the Trump Shutdown.
Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the nations of the world.